There are some franchises in the NBA that just can't seem to get things right, whether it be putting the wrong pieces around a gifted star, drafting poorly, or being on the wrong end of a very bad trade. There are those teams that just have a very, very hard time succeeding and doing so on a consistent basis. And then there are those franchises that have just been downright terrible, historically bad. And then every year you think, maybe they're starting to turn things around. It goes from bad to worse, especially when there are circumstances that are happening off the court with their player personnel that they have very little control over. And yes, of course, in this instance, I'm talking about the Charlotte Hornets, who have had a rough few days between the outbursts of Kai Jones waiving him and then yet again another arrest warrant being issued for Miles Bridges. So what does this mean for the future of this team? How do they shake off these PR nightmares that just keep happening? And how do they finally start getting to winning for a team that has never even made it to the conference finals in its franchise history? As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribed, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, it's easy for people to poke fun at a franchise like Charlotte. They have 0 titles to their name, 0 conference titles, and although they have had some fun and exciting years back in the 90s, since then they really haven't done much. In fact, the Hornets haven't won a playoff series since 2002. And have only been to the playoffs 3 times since then. Like, as much as we talk about how bad of a history teams like the Kings, the Timberwolves, or the Knicks have had, really nothing compares to that of the Charlotte Hornets. And don't even get me started on their draft history and failed picks therefrom, where they had multiple opportunities to land stars. I've already talked about that in past videos, so I won't go into that here. But really, this is more about the off-court issues with the Hornets, which you can't really fault the Hornets themselves because they can only have so much control over the players and what they do with their personal lives. You can only reprimand a player so much, and if they don't change, what do you do then? But what the Hornets have failed to do is take the necessary actions they should have taken a long time ago on Miles Bridges. Now, if you don't know, back in the summer of 2022, right after the Hornets had extended Miles Bridges a qualifying offer to become a restricted free agent, and the expectation was Bridges was going to get paid. He was coming off the best season of his career. You might even call it a breakout season, where he averaged over 20 points per game on solid efficiency, shooting over 49% from the field, averaged 7 rebounds, nearly 4 assists. He was improving on the defensive end, and being only 23 years old, there were talks about Bridges potentially looking for a max contract offer coming off of his rookie deal. And the Hornets, again, would have the ability to match any offer by extending him that qualifying offer, which made him a restricted free agent. And then, literally 2 days before the start of free agency, when teams would start making offers to Bridges, he gets arrested for felony domestic violence charges where he allegedly assaulted his wife in front of their 2 kids. The assault, according to the hospital report, included strangulation, brain contusion, a nose fracture, a rib contusion, and multiple bruises on her body. Bridges was arrested and put in jail and was released on a $130,000 bond. Bridges ultimately was charged on 3 counts, one in which of injuring a child's parent and 2 felony counts of child abuse for subjecting his children to witnessing him beating their mother. The 2 child abuse charges was ultimately dropped, and Bridges pleaded no contest on the domestic charge and was sentenced to 3 years probation. No jail time, nothing, for beating the crap out of his wife. Now, after all of this occurring over the summer, the Hornets did decide to rescind the qualifying offer to Bridges amidst all the allegations, but they did not waive him. They did not let him go. And even after he pleaded no contest and was charged 3 years probation, they still did nothing. The NBA eventually suspended Bridges for 30 games for domestic violence in April of 2023 after they conducted their own investigation. This, of course, after Bridges hadn't played the whole season, which, don't get me wrong, 30 games is a lot, and you would hope a suspension like that, you would hope after getting into all this legal trouble as well, negative publicity, 3 years probation, the dude would be on his best behavior and try and turn his life around and not throw his career away at such a young age. But what we think would make sense to us doesn't always end up being the case, because even after things started settling down, the Hornets were planning on having Bridges play after he fully served his 30-game suspension. Reports have now come out from this week that a warrant for Bridges' arrest has been issued yet again. And initially it was because he violated a protective order that kept him out of jail in the first place, which dictated that he stay away from his ex and their children for 10 years. But to make it worse, not only did he violate the protective order by coming near her, but yet again he decided to get more violent by throwing pool balls, not swimming pool balls, billiard balls, throwing them at her car, breaking her windshield, and doing so with the kids in the car. Those poor kids, man. I mean, talk about traumatizing events that will stay with them for the rest of their life. Now, I know this is still fairly early days as it relates to these charges. He hasn't been found guilty, and at the time of this recording anyway, charges haven't officially been filed, and I'm sure it's going to be an ongoing investigation both for the NBA and for the Charlotte Hornets. But come on now. The Hornets cannot let this guy play for them. Yeah, he was a great player, and it's rare for them to draft a quality player that they could use to build with, but they should have cut their losses a long time ago when these first charges came about and have been done with it. And while yes, everyone makes mistakes, maybe it's an isolated incident and we don't know the whole backstory, so you try and give them another chance to make things right, but when it happens again, nah, you don't come back from that. And look, as someone who grew up in a household of women, who now has a wife and 2 daughters, I have zero tolerance for men putting their hands on women. There is no excuse to be beating on women, and it's one thing to get a pass from the legal system as well as the NBA. When you do it the first time, you don't get any jail time. The league still is allowing you to play and only suspend you for 30 games. But having it occur a second time, that's a pattern that isn't going to stop. That man has a problem. And I don't want to diminish mental health because I'm sure Bridges, he himself has been going through his own demons and issues. But it doesn't give you the right to not only hit a woman, but also your wife, and to subject your kids to that, which will forever psychologically scar them. This dude cannot play in the NBA ever again. He can't. It would be a terrible look for the NBA if they still allow him to play in a league after this happens a second time. You know, we all like to talk about Ja Morant flashing a gun on Instagram and how that's a bad look for the league, and it is, but Ja being an idiot is not the same as a violent individual who is physically hurting others. Miles Bridges should not be allowed to play in the NBA ever again, period. And I would be shocked if Bridges isn't waived by the Hornets before the start of the season. The Hornets aside though, I mean, the NBA needs to make an example of this out of Bridges, to say, hey, it doesn't matter how good you are. You can't do stuff like this. You are not above the law. Now, the whole Bridges thing aside, though, I mean, it hasn't been a good week for the Hornets. I'm sure you all saw they waived Kai Jones, their former first-round pick from just a couple seasons ago, after he had some pretty bizarre outbursts on social media where it looked like he was on drugs, to them publicly requesting a trade on Twitter. Probably the first time we've ever seen a publicly requested trade from a player themselves on social media. And the Hornets said, yeah, enough is enough. We're letting this kid go, which is easier for them to do because Kai Jones hasn't really done that well in the NBA. He's not the same player that Miles Bridges is, and his overall salary hit on their books is pretty minimal. But with Kai Jones, I mean, I'm going to withhold judgment on this one because it's pretty clear Kai is struggling right now mentally, and maybe these are cries for help, and you just have a bunch of people making fun of him instead of actually helping him. It's not like he hurt anybody, so while I get the Hornets waived him, especially since he didn't want to play for them anymore, I'm not holding this on the same standard as Miles Bridges. But the thing is, it doesn't just end with Bridges and Kai Jones, does it? James Bouknight, their lottery pick from 2 years ago, he was arrested and charged for driving while intoxicated. They ended up finding a gun in his car at that time as well. And then, of course, their number 2 pick, Brandon Miller, who they took over Scoot Henderson, which I think will still end up being a massive mistake. But Brandon Miller being involved in a murder incident when he was in college at Alabama, driving the car that Darius Miles shot out of his window and killed a 23-year-old woman. And that's the thing that I don't get about the Hornets as an organization. It's one thing if you draft poorly, but part of the recruiting and scouting process when it comes to drafting players is interviewing them and assessing their characters. Are they just completely misreading and just terrible judges of character? Obviously, you're not going to know or get to know everything about a player by just a handful of interviews, but if you have the history there, which some of these players did have their history behind them, you might think twice, especially when you have such high draft picks, which the Hornets have had high draft picks for years now because they can never make the playoffs. And this is what makes the Hornets as an organization especially bad, because not only have they been terrible on the court for years, but they continually find themselves in off-court drama and issues that I'm sure their PR team is going to be demanding a raise for after all this is said and done. Anyway, let me know what you guys think, what your thoughts are on all of this. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.